Ethereal Hollywood Volume 1, Queens of the Celluoid Desert. By Arnold Kalnitsky. Preface. Ethereal Hollywood is a world reconfigured from the golden age of Hollywood, where the legendary stars are not just memories, but immortal archetypes, still living in their own parallel alternative reality. Familiar history is not duplicated but flexible and constantly revisioning itself along diverse pathways. Time and space are also more fluid and less binding. And what has been called magic works in odd and unusual ways, producing scenarios from the silly to the surreal. This is just one such peek into that world. The alley cat blinked, its tail twitching once. Then it vanished into the mist creeping off the Pacific. Across the street, a neon martini glass flickered above brass doors. Inside, laughter spilled out warm and bright, hitting the cool night air. Piano notes tangled with ice clinking in glasses. A doorman in silver braid tipped his hat to a couple gliding past. Their evening clothes caught the light like liquid metal. Mae West paused at the top of the curved staircase. She surveyed the room below through half-lowered lashes. Every table was packed. Gable's laugh boomed near the bar. Astaire tapped a rhythm on the marble counter. West smoothed her platinum gown. Timing mattered. She descended slowly, letting the chatter hush a beat. At a corner booth, Rudolph Valentino swirled brandy in a crystal snifter. His dark eyes tracked West's progress. He didn't rise when she stopped before him. A faint smile touched his lips. "Darling," he murmured. The word hung between them, charged as a spotlight. She slid into the plush seat without waiting for an invitation. Outside, fog thickened around the street lamps. It muffled the distant clang of a cable car bell. Inside, the piano shifted to a slower, smokier tune. Ginger Rogers leaned toward Fred Astaire, whispering something that made him chuckle softly. Her sequined dress scattered prismatic light across his tuxedo lapel. Valentino's hand brushed Mae's wrist. "Hecht's throwing one of his parties tomorrow," he said. Marlene's convinced him to finance Crawford's new picture. His thumb traced idle circles on her skin. Mae felt the room's collective gaze prickling her neck. She leaned closer, catching the sandalwood and tobacco scent clinging to his jacket. The club doors swung open again. A hush fell as Joan Crawford strode in, chin high, ermine coat draped over her shoulders. Raindrops glistened in her dark hair. She scanned the room, her gaze sharp as cut glass. Astaire's tapping ceased mid-rhythm. Mae didn't turn, but Valentino's fingers tightened imperceptibly on her arm. "Seems Marlene's choice of leading lady isn't settled," Joan announced to the room. Her voice sliced through the smoky air. She peeled off her gloves slowly, finger by finger. Near the bar, Gable exchanged a look with William Powell. Both men straightened their ties. Mae finally tilted her head. "Darling," she purred, her voice honey over gravel. "You're dripping on the Persian." Joan's smile didn't reach her eyes. She slid into the booth opposite them, the fur pooling around her like storm clouds. The piano player struck a discordant note. Outside, the fog swallowed the last echo of the cable car. Inside, the silence thickened. Ginger Rogers' sequins stilled. Valentino lifted his snifter, the brandy catching the light like liquid amber. "So," he murmured, his thumb still circling Mae's wrist. "Who's directing this masterpiece?" Joan's laugh was brittle. "Why," she said, leaning forward. "Isn't it obvious?" Her eyes locked on Mae's. "It has to be von Sternberg. But he only works with certain muses." The unspoken challenge hung between them, sharp as broken crystal. Mae's smile widened. She didn't blink. Near the bar, Gable cleared his throat. The sound cracked the tension. William Powell adjusted his monocle, a ghost of amusement playing on his lips. "Seems Dietrich might have opinions," he offered mildly, swirling his gin. Joan's ermine rustled as she shifted. "Dietrich's in Paris," she snapped. "Chasing rainbows or revolutions." Her gaze flicked to Valentino. "Unless Rudy's been sending her telegrams again." Valentino merely sipped his brandy. The piano player tentatively resumed a Cole Porter melody, low and wary. May traced the rim of her untouched champagne flute. The chill seeped into her fingertips. "Darling," she drawled, her voice a velvet purr. "Why fuss over directors?" She let her eyes drift toward the shadowed alcove where Sam Goldwyn puffed thoughtfully on a cigar. "It's the writer who matters. And I hear Ben Hecht's cooking up something spicy." Joan's knuckles whitened on the table's edge. Goldwyn exhaled a slow plume of smoke, his expression unreadable. Crawford's smile turned predatory. "Hecht only writes for winners, May." The martini glass neon blinked through the fogged window, painting Joan's face in sudden crimson light. Valentino set his snifter down with a soft click. "Parties," he sighed, leaning back into the plush velvet. "Always such delightful chaos." His fingers brushed May's knee beneath the table, hidden by the damask cloth. "Especially Hecht's. Remember the peacocks last time?" Joan stood abruptly, her coat swirling. "Bring your own drama this time," she hissed. "I certainly will." She strode toward the door, leaving a wake of unsettled air and the faint scent of gardenias. The piano surged into a defiant, jazzy crescendo. May watched her go, then lifted her champagne. "To peacocks," she murmured, her eyes glinting like polished steel. Outside, Joan's heels echoed sharply on wet pavement before fading. Inside, Fred Astaire spun Ginger Rogers onto the small dance floor. Their steps sliced through the lingering tension, crisp and precise as a metronome. Clark Gable slid into Joan's vacated seat, his grin wide but watchful. "Von Sternberg," he chuckled, nodding toward Powell. "The man's got taste." Powell polished his monocle thoughtfully. "Taste," he echoed, "and a temper hotter than Garbo's glare." He gestured toward the bar where Garbo sat alone, nursing a vodka, her profile a study in enigmatic stillness. May's laugh was low, intimate. "Perfect. Nothing spices up a script like volatility." Goldwyn emerged from the shadows, cigar smoke trailing him like a banner. He stopped at the booth, tapping ash into a crystal tray. "Hecht's outline," he rumbled. "A desert epic. Camels, betrayal, poisoned daggers." His gaze settled on May, then flicked to Valentino. "The Sheik returns." Valentino's smile was lazy, dangerous. "Only if the script promises a worthy adversary." Goldwyn's eyes narrowed slightly. "Oh, she'll be worthy," he said, exhaling a plume toward May. "A queen who steals empires." May arched an eyebrow. "Darling," she purred, "I never steal." She let the pause linger. "I conquer." The club doors burst open again. Clara Bow tumbled in, breathless and laughing, raindrops sparkling in her bobbed hair like scattered diamonds. "Sorry I'm late," she sang out, shaking water from her fur-trimmed coat. "The most divine accident outside Grauman's." Two Packards kissing. The room exhaled, laughter bubbling up like champagne. Astaire spun Ginger faster, her sequins scattering light across Clara's flushed cheeks. May watched Clara's entrance, then turned back to Valentino. Her voice dropped to a whisper only he could hear above the rising music. "Tomorrow," she said, her thumb tracing his knuckle. "Let's give Hecht a scandal even he can't buy." Valentino's fingers tightened around hers. Outside, the fog swallowed the city whole. At the bar, Garbo finally moved. She slid from her stool, a pale ghost drifting toward the exit without a word. Her untouched vodka glass left a perfect ring on the polished mahogany. William Powell caught her eye as she passed, a silent question. Garbo paused, her gaze sweeping over the booth where May leaned close to Valentino, then lingering on Goldwyn's calculating stare. A flicker of something cold crossed her face before she vanished into the mist. Powell tapped his monocle against his palm. "Volatility," he murmured to Gable. "Seems we've got plenty." Clara Bow squeezed into the booth beside Gable, stealing his untouched gin fizz. "So," she chirped, eyes wide. "Who's poisoning whom in the desert?" Goldwyn puffed his cigar, the smoke coiling around May like a challenge. "The Queen," he said slowly, betrays the chic at dawn. Valentino's smile didn't reach his eyes. May leaned forward, her platinum hair catching the low light. Darling, she purred, everyone knows dawn's too predictable. She held Goldwyn's gaze. Make it midnight. Under a blood moon. Clara shivered dramatically. Ooh, yes. With scimitars. Outside, thunder rumbled, a low, hungry growl over the Pacific. Inside, the piano faltered mid-note. The crystal chandeliers trembled, casting nervous shadows. Fred and Ginger froze mid-spin. In the sudden silence, May's champagne flute slipped from her fingers. It shattered on the marble floor, sharp as gunfire. Valentino's hand shot out, gripping her wrist, not gently now. His eyes locked on the trembling windows. Not thunder, he breathed. Across the room, Crawford's abandoned ermine coat slid from its chair, pooling on the tiles like a fallen storm. At the bar, Garbo's untouched vodka glass cracked clean down the middle. Powell stared as amber liquid bled across mahogany. Clara gasped, pointing at the fog-choked windows where ghostly shapes pressed against the glass, elongated silhouettes in fedoras and furs, flickering like damaged film. Goldwyn's cigar fell from his lips. The extras, he rasped. They're not supposed to leave the lot. One shape resolved into a translucent Jean Harlow, platinum hair swirling in mist, mouthing silent words against the pane. Valentino stood, pulling May up with him. The boundaries thinning, he muttered. The club lights dimmed, then flared crimson. Outside, the neon martini glass exploded in a shower of sparks. Gable vaulted over the bar, grabbing a bottle of bourbon by the neck. Back door. He barked at Powell. But the exit was already dissolving, brass handles melting into liquid gold, wood grain unraveling like loose thread. Ginger Rogers screamed as her sequined hem began to fray into shimmering dust. May wrenched free, snatching Crawford's fallen ermine. She whirled it like a shield as phantom claws scraped the disintegrating door. Sam, she shouted over the rising wail of wind. Your desert epic. Goldwyn stared at her, then at Valentino. Understanding flashed between them. Valentino drew a silver cigarette case, engraved with a scimitar, and snapped it open. Not cigarettes inside, but glittering black sand. He flung it hard against the floor. New scene. He roared as the sand erupted into a whirling dervish of midnight and stars. The last thing Clara saw before the darkness swallowed them all was Mae West's savage grin, lit by the dying embers of Goldwyn's cigar. Silence. Then heat. May blinked against the sudden glare. Endless dunes stretched beneath a sky scorched white-hot. Valentino stood beside her, his tuxedo replaced by flowing robes the color of dried blood. Goldwyn's cigar smoke lingered, now smelling of sun-baked stone and camel dung. Crawford's ermine lay heavy and useless in May's grip. Clara scrambled up, coughing sand. Where's Fred? She gasped. Where's Ginger? Only the relentless wind answered. Valentino pointed. 3 dark specks moved on the horizon. Mounted riders. Goldwyn groaned, wiping sweat from his brow. Hecht's outline, he muttered. Camels, betrayal. His voice trailed off as he saw the riders raise long, curved blades that caught the merciless sun. The air shimmered. Garbo materialized atop a dune, impossibly cool in white linen, a vial of silver dust clutched in her hand. She surveyed the scene, May clutching fur in the desert, Valentino tense, Goldwyn sweating, Clara panicking. Volatility, Garbo murmured, her voice cutting through the wind. She tipped the vial. The dust fell, freezing the sand beneath the riders, hooves into sudden, treacherous ice. One mount stumbled. A rider cursed, William Powell's unmistakable voice, now roughened by desert grit. He rubbed his mustache, glaring at Garbo. Always the dramatic entrance, Gretta. Behind him, Gable grinned fiercely, gripping his bourbon bottle like a club. Ginger Rogers clung to Astaire, her sequins dulled but intact. May dropped the ermine. It sank into the sand. She smoothed her platinum hair, now powdered gold by the desert wind. Midnight, she declared, staring toward the distant, hazy silhouette of mountains. Under a blood moon, she turned her back on the riders, on Garbo's ice, on Goldwyn's frantic scribbling on a scrap of parchment. Valentino's hand settled on the jeweled hilt at his waist. His eyes met May's. The challenge wasn't Joan's anymore. It was etched in the dunes, whispered by the scimitars, promised in the unnatural chill spreading from Garbo's frozen patch. Tomorrow was Hecht's party. Tonight, they conquered a world unraveling at its golden seams. The wind howled, carrying the faint, discordant echo of a distant piano. Gable swung the bourbon bottle. It smashed against the frozen sand beneath Powell's stumbling camel, spraying amber liquid and glittering ice shards. The beast screamed, pitching Powell sideways. Ginger Rogers gasped, clutching Astaire's arm tighter. "Fred," she breathed. He nodded, his dancer's instinct kicking in. In one fluid motion, he scooped Ginger up, spun her away from the chaos, and planted his patent leather shoe firmly on the flank of Powell's fallen mount. It bucked, sending Powell sprawling directly into Goldwyn's path. The producer cursed, parchment fluttering from his grasp. Clara scrambled after it, snatching it from the air just before the wind could claim Hecht's desert outline. Garbo watched, impassive. The vial in her hand was empty. She tilted her head, studying Mae West standing defiantly against the furnace sky. A flicker of something like respect touched Garbo's icy eyes. Then, without a word, she turned and began walking toward the shimmering mountains, her linen coat billowing like a sail. The silver dust had done its work, the immediate threat was frozen chaos. But the riders were regrouping, their fury palpable in the dry heat. Powell struggled to his feet, monocle cracked, dignity bruised. He glared at the departing Garbo. "Paris," he muttered bitterly, brushing sand from his tweed jacket. Revolution would be less trouble. Valentino stepped forward, robe swirling. He drew his scimitar. The blade caught the sun, casting a long, sharp shadow across May's face. "Betrayal," he murmured, his gaze locked on the advancing riders. One wore a familiar, arrogant sneer beneath a silk headscarf, Joan Crawford, eyes blazing with borrowed fury. "Is poison." May smiled, slow and dangerous. She reached into the folds of her gown, withdrawing not jewels, but a small, ornate dagger, its hilt gleaming like obsidian. She didn't look at the dagger. She looked at Valentino. "Only," she purred, her voice cutting through the wind, "if you believe the script." The riders spurred their mounts forward, blades raised. The desert held its breath. Clara clutched Hecht's parchment, her knuckles white. She scanned the frantic scrawl: poisoned daggers, midnight rendezvous, a queen's treachery. "Sam," she yelled over the rising drumbeat of hooves. It says the poisoned dagger is hidden in the oasis." Goldwyn snatched the parchment, squinting. "Oasis," he bellowed, sweat stinging his eyes. "What oasis?" Hecht wrote dunes. Endless dunes. He gestured wildly at the barren expanse. Astaire pivoted, shielding Ginger. His eyes darted, calculating angles, distances. He saw at first, a faint, impossible shimmer low on the horizon, like heat haze but cooler, greener. "There," he said softly, pointing. "A mirage. Or Garbo's destination." Crawford's blade flashed, aimed straight for Valentino's heart. May moved. Not toward Crawford, not toward the shimmer. She dropped low, scooping a handful of burning sand. As Crawford's blade descended, May flung the sand into the eyes of Joan's mount. The beast reared, screaming, throwing Crawford sideways. Valentino's scimitar met another rider's curved blade in a shower of sparks. Gable, grinning fiercely beneath his headscarf, bourbon bottle now a makeshift club. "Always did prefer a brawl," he roared. Powell surveyed the melee. He spotted Garbo's distant figure nearing the shimmer. "Revolution," he sighed, pulling a surprisingly modern Colt 45 from his tweed jacket. "Requires preparation." He fired a warning shot over the riders' heads. The sharp crack echoed unnaturally, silencing the wind for a heartbeat. Goldwyn crumpled the parchment. "Forget Hecht," he rasped, staring at the chaos, Crawford scrambling, Gable clashing with Valentino, Powell reloading, Clara trembling. He looked toward the shimmering mountains, then at May, who stood poised, dagger ready, her platinum hair like a beacon. "New scene," Goldwyn shouted, his producer's instinct overriding fear. "Sunset. The Queen," he pointed at May, "chooses her own ending." May's laugh was low, triumphant. She met Valentino's glance across the clash of steel. His nod was subtle. Together, they broke away, turning their backs on the riders, their blades pointing not toward enemies, but toward the distant, shimmering promise Garbo sought. The desert wind roared approval, carrying the scent of ozone and possibility. Hecht's party seemed a lifetime away. Gable lowered his bourbon bottle, momentarily stunned. "The hell," he muttered, watching May and Valentino stride toward the mountains. Joan, Crawford hissed, wiping sand from her mouth. "Cowards," she spat, but Powell's Colt .45 barked again, kicking up dust near her boots. "Change of script, Joan," Powell called smoothly, though sweat stained his collar. Clara clutched Golden's arm. "Sam, what about Fred and Ginger?" Astaire hadn't hesitated. He'd seen May's pivot, Golden's command. With Ginger's hand tight in his, he danced them sideways, a graceful evasion past Crawford's snarling mount, following May's path toward the shimmer. Ginger's sequins flashed, defiant sparks against the encroaching dusk. The desert felt suddenly fluid, reality bending toward Garbo's distant figure. The riders milled, confused. Joan's fury faltered. The frozen patch of Garbo's dust glittered mockingly. Powell holstered his Colt, adjusting his cracked monocle. "Well," he sighed, dusting off his lapels. "Seems the extras are writing themselves out." He offered Joan a wry half-bow. "Care to join the revolution?" Joan glared at the shrinking figures of May and Valentino, then at Garbo's distant silhouette. Her jaw tightened. With a furious cry, she spurred her mount not toward them, but deeper into the dunes, vanishing in a plume of sand. Gable chuckled, hoisting his bourbon bottle. "Always knew she'd storm off eventually." He took a long swig, then squinted at Powell. "Mountains." Powell shrugged. "Where else? Lead the way, Clark." They followed, leaving the frozen chaos and Hecht's discarded script behind. They crested the final dune. Below lay not sand, but a lush oasis, palm trees swaying, water glinting turquoise. Garbo stood ankle-deep in a clear pool, her linen coat discarded, her face tilted toward the first stars piercing the twilight. Valentino paused beside May, his robes settling. The air was cooler here, smelling of jasmine and wet stone. Behind them, Astaire and Ginger arrived, breathless but elegant. Goldwyn stumbled down, Clara pulling him. Gable and Powell brought up the rear. Garbo turned. Her gaze swept over them, lingering on May's dagger, Valentino's scimitar, Golden's crumpled parchment. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Midnight," she murmured, her voice echoing strangely in the oasis stillness. Above, the sky bruised purple. A single, crimson star flickered like a blood moon rising. May tightened her grip on the dagger. The desert was gone. The real drama was just beginning. Gable obsrved, bourbon bottle held high. "Drinks," he roared, the sound scattering birds from the palms. Ginger Rogers dipped her toes in the water, sighing as sequins shimmered beneath the surface. Fred Astaire studied the ripples, his dancer's mind tracing patterns. Powell knelt, filling his canteen. Clara waded toward Garbo. "Is it magic?" she whispered, eyes wide. Garbo didn't answer. She watched May and Valentino approach the water's edge. The oasis pulsed, a heartbeat felt through the soles of their feet. Goldwyn stared at the parchment in his hands. The ink blurred, words dissolving into new ones, the oasis of whispers. He looked up sharply. "Garbo," he rasped. "What script is this?" Garbo lifted her hand. Silver dust glinted on her palm. Not script, she said softly. Truth. Valentino's scimitar hissed as he drew it. Not toward Garbo, but toward the darkening jungle beyond the pool. Shapes moved there, elongated shadows with eyes like fractured glass. May stepped forward, dagger ready. Extras, she murmured. Garbo shook her head. Witnesses. The shadows solidified into translucent figures. Jean Harlow's platinum hair, William Powell's monocle uncracked now, Fred Astaire's polished shoes, all flickering, silent. They watched with hollow intensity. Ginger gasped. Astaire pulled her close. Gable lowered his bottle. Powell's hand drifted toward his Colt. Clara hid behind Goldwyn. Valentino's blade caught the crimson starlight. Boundaries thinner here, he breathed. Garbo nodded. The pool rippled violently. A marble column erupted from the water, slick and ancient, carved with symbols May didn't recognize. Hecht's party felt like a childish dream. Mae West walked into the pool. Water soaked her gown, dragging it heavy. She didn't look at the witnesses, the shadows, or the column. She looked only at Garbo. Enough whispers, May declared, her voice echoing across the water. She raised the obsidian dagger, not to strike, but to offer it, hilt first, to Garbo. Write the scene. Garbo stared at the blade, then at May's unwavering eyes. Slowly, she reached out. Her fingers closed over the hilt. The silver dust on her palm ignited, swirling down the blade like liquid starlight. The column glowed. The witnesses leaned forward, mouths open in silent hunger. Valentino's scimitar lowered a fraction. Goldwyn held his breath. Above them, the crimson star pulsed once, flooding the oasis with bloody light. The piano note from the club hung in the air, unresolved. Gable shoved his bourbon bottle into Powell's hands. He waded toward the column, boots sinking in silt. What's it say? He demanded, squinting at the carvings, twisting serpents, crescent moons, a scimitar piercing a sun. Garbo traced the symbols with May's dagger. It's a door, she murmured. The dagger's tip clicked against stone. A grinding shudder shook the oasis. Palm fronds trembled. Water sloshed over Ginger's sequined hem. Astaire steadied her, eyes fixed on the column. A crack appeared, jagged as lightning. Dust rained down. Inside, darkness yawned, cold, smelling of celluloid and ozone. Clara Bow squeaked, clutching Golden's sleeve. Not a desert, she whispered. It's a backlot. The witness extras surged forward. Translucent hands reached for the crack, fingers passing through stone like smoke. Jean Harlow's ghostly lips formed May's name. Powell raised his Colt, useless against phantoms. Valentino stepped between May and the fissure, scimitar raised. Stay back, he warned, but the shadows flowed around him, dissolving into the dark beyond the column. Garbo lowered the dagger. They're drawn to it, she said. The source. Goldwyn stared into the abyss. Hecht never wrote this, he breathed. The crimson light deepened. May snatched her dagger back from Garbo. Midnight, she said, and plunged into the darkness. Her platinum hair vanished like a snuffed candle. Valentino followed without hesitation, robe swallowed by shadow. Gable splashed into the pool. Silence fell, thick and sudden. Only the pool's ripple broke it. Ginger Rogers stared at the column, trembling. Astaire squeezed her hand. Always the grand exit, he murmured. He glanced at Garbo, then at the crack. A faint, flickering light beckoned from within, not starlight, but the harsh glare of arc lamps. Gable took a swig from Powell's bottle. Well, he grunted, wiping his mouth. Parties inside. He strode forward, vanishing after May. Powell sighed, adjusted his cracked monocle, and followed. Clara tugged Golden's arm. Sam, come on. Goldwyn crumpled Hecht's parchment one last time, dropping it into the water. Ink bled, forming a single word, action. He stepped into the fissure. Garbo watched them go, her face unreadable. Then she turned to Astaire and Rogers. The dance, she said simply. Astaire bowed. Ginger lifted her chin. Together, hand in hand, they waltzed into the dark, sequins catching the dying crimson light. Garbo stood alone. The column sealed behind them with a sound like a real ending. The oasis dissolved into mist. Only the Colt 45, forgotten in the silt, remained. Inside, the heat vanished. Cold, dry air bit at May's skin. She stood on a vast, shadowed soundstage. Above, catwalks crisscrossed emptiness. Ahead, towering plywood pyramids loomed under banks of unlit Klieg lights. Valentino materialized beside her, scimitar gleaming. Stage 5, he breathed. Footsteps echoed, Gable, Powell, Clara, Goldwyn stumbling out behind them. Ginger gasped. It's Egypt. Astaire tapped the dusty floorboards. Pine, he corrected softly. Not sandstone. Suddenly, a blinding spotlight snapped on, pinning them. From the darkness beyond the pyramids, a dry, familiar chuckle rasped. Late for rehearsal, Louis B. Mayer announced, stepping into the light. His eyes, hard and calculating, swept over May's soaked gown, Valentino's robes. Costumes stay on. Soundstage revealed its edges, canvas skies, plaster sphinxes. Figures emerged from the shadows, extras in cheap linen kilts, their faces blurred, indistinct. They shuffled forward, silent. Clara Bow whimpered. Powell drew his Colt. Mayer smiled thinly. Put it away, Powell. This isn't that kind of picture. He snapped his fingers. A projector whirred to life overhead, casting flickering images onto a scrim. Scenes from Valentino's, the chic, distorted, speeded up. Valentino stiffened. May stepped forward, dagger hidden in her folds. What picture, Louis? Mayer's smile widened. The remake, darling. Bigger. Better. His gaze locked on Valentino. We found a new chic. Younger. He nodded toward the shadows. A lean figure stepped forward, James Dean, leather jacket incongruous beneath a silk headscarf, eyes burning with restless intensity. Goldwyn choked. Dean. Hecht never. Mayer cut him off. Hecht's script, he said, is obsolete. Dean lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his defiant smirk. He ignored Valentino, staring straight at May. Heard you play conquerors, he drawled. The extras shuffled closer, their silence oppressive. Garbo materialized silently beside Astaire, her vial of dust clutched tight. Mayer raised his hand. Places. He barked. The Klieg lights blazed white-hot. Dean flicked his cigarette toward Valentino. It landed, smoldering, at the Sheikh's booted feet. The projector stuttered, showing Valentino's face melting into Dean's. May's knuckles whitened on the dagger. The old world wasn't unraveling. It was being recast. Valentino stepped over the cigarette, robe swirling like spilled wine. His scimitar remained sheathed. Youth, he murmured, eyes never leaving Dean. So eager to burn. Clara Bow hid behind Powell's shoulder. But he's not even golden. She whispered. Powell's Colt felt suddenly heavy. Mayer chuckled. Golden's a state of mind, Clara. Asked Joan. On the scrim, Crawford's face flashed, furious, trapped in Dietrich's shadow. Ginger Rogers touched Astaire's arm. Can we dance? She breathed. Astaire watched the extras forming a tightening circle. Not yet, he whispered. Goldwyn stared at Mayer. The oasis, the column. Mayer waved a dismissive hand. Special effects, Sam. Audiences want spectacle now. He snapped his fingers again. The plywood pyramids began to rotate, grinding on hidden gears. Garbo uncorked her vial. Silver dust drifted toward Dean, swirling around his leather jacket. He coughed, waving it away, but the dust clung, glittering like frost. Cut! Mayer roared. The Klieg lights flickered violently. The projector jammed, freezing on Dean's distorted scream. May saw her moment. She lunged, not at Dean, but at Mayer. Her dagger pressed against his starched collar. Rewrite, she hissed. The extras froze. Dean laughed, a raw, jagged sound. Drama queen. Valentino moved then, swift as desert wind. His hand clamped Dean's shoulder. "Quiet, boy," he commanded. The scrim behind them tore, revealing not canvas, but the swirling, star-strewn void of Ethereal Hollywood's true sky. Garbo's dust pulsed brighter. Silence fell, thick as stage curtains. Mayer didn't flinch. "You always did overact, May," he sighed. Behind him, the void shimmered. Shapes coalesced, ghostly figures in tuxedos and gowns, the witnesses from the oasis, flickering at the edge of the soundstage. They watched, hollow-eyed. Goldwyn grabbed Clara's hand. Backlots crumbling. Powell holstered his Colt, eyeing the tear in reality. Astaire spun Ginger away from the encroaching extras. "Now," he murmured. Their feet tapped a frantic rhythm on the dusty boards, a counterpoint to the grinding pyramids. Dean struggled against Valentino's grip. May's dagger bit deeper. Mayer smiled. The Klieg lights died. Only Garbo's silver dust lit the darkness, and the hungry eyes of the witnesses glowed in the void. Garbo raised her vial. A single drop of mercury-bright liquid fell. It hit the soundstage floor with a sound like shattering crystal. Cracks spider-webbed outward, swallowing Dean's cigarette butt, Mayer's polished shoes. The plywood pyramids groaned, tilting dangerously. Valentino released Dean, shoving him toward the fissure. "Run, boy," he snarled. Dean stumbled, catching himself on a plaster sphinx. His smirk faltered as the dust beneath him turned to quicksand. Clara screamed. Powell dragged her back. Goldwyn scrambled toward the projector booth, shouting unheard commands. The witnesses surged forward, translucent hands grasping for Garbo's vial. May pressed her blade. A bead of blood welled on Mayer's collar. His smile didn't waver. "Scene change," he whispered. The rotating pyramids lurched violently. One slammed down where Ginger had stood seconds before. Plaster exploded. Astaire pulled her clear, his tuxedo powdered white. "Special effects." Mayer laughed, blood trickling down his shirt front. Garbo hurled her vial into the void. It vanished, then detonated, a silent supernova of silver light. The witnesses dissolved, shrieking soundlessly. The soundstage buckled. Dean vanished into the quicksand fissure with a final, furious curse. Valentino grabbed May's wrist. "The real," he shouted, pointing to the jammed projector. Its spool smoked, celluloid melting. Goldwyn reached it, fumbling for the lever. The scrim showed Valentino's face burning away, replaced by Garbo's icy stare. Mayer's eyes widened. "No reshoots," he choked. May wrenched free. She sprinted past Mayer, dagger forgotten, and slammed her palm onto the projector's emergency stop. The machine whined, died. Darkness swallowed them. Only Garbo's fading stardust illuminated the chaos. Astaire shielding Ginger under a tilted sphinx, Powell shielding Clara with his body, Goldwyn coughing in plaster dust. Valentino stood alone, robes torn, staring at the place Dean had vanished. Mayer slumped against a pyramid, clutching his throat. The silence was absolute. Then, faintly, the distant chime of a cable car bell drifted through the torn scrim. May smoothed her ruined gown. "Midnight," she breathed. Outside the soundstage doors, neon sputtered back to life, pink, green, gold, painting the wet pavement of Ethereal Hollywood. The party wasn't over. It had just moved locations.